I'm glad I went last because in a sense, if you put all of the three previous ones together, then hopefully that builds to tell the story that I'm about to tell. I could do a demo, but I'm not going to do a demo because kind of time is kind of moving on. And I'm not going to talk any detailed tech because in a sense, what I'm going to talk about is how we've taken all the things that have been described before, but then applied them in a business context in the spaces that we thought were the easiest to start with, which is primarily defence and national security, which with hindsight might not be quite the kind of sensible space to start. However, just as background, so Rob Price, my background is big corporates really, global tech. I was one of the first chief digital officers probably around in about 2013. I worked on things like the Olympics. And for the 5 years before the pandemic, I was COO for a global payment business. But I've always done emerging tech. Maybe apart from when I started my career as a developer using assembler, which might not have been necessarily kind of considered as emerging tech at the time, but emerging tech. So this is a story of four of us who set out about 18 months ago with the intent of how do we make sense of generative AI at the heart of highly assured, highly secure organizations. Now, in part, that was because those are the worlds that were known to us. One of my co-founders spent 15 years using data and AI at the heart of national security. So in a sense, it's a world we knew. One of my other co-founders, based out in Washington, had spent many years working with the US government and DoD. So that was our space. I suppose it's also worth adding, aside from the day job, probably the thing that I'm most known for globally is digital responsibility. Somebody introduced me the other day. I was doing a lecture at a university in Austria, in Vienna, remotely, sadly. And I was introduced as the founding father of digital responsibility, which made me feel even older than I am, and I'm old already. So important in this context because as organizations are using large language models and agents, it's kind of important to understand the impacts that you're potentially having, either intended or unintended, in terms of consequential impact. So if you like, this is the story of putting all of those things together. It's how do you kind of use generative AI in highly assured, highly secure organizations with a group of people who kind of understand that background, but have also got a view on how do we do it in the right way and properly. I'm not going to give a time frame in terms of this is the thing that we did then and then and then, other than to say, in October 2023, we'd implemented large-scale multi-agent systems solving highly complex tasks in secure environments. And I still look back at that slightly astonished in the context of that. That's today's conversation, not then. We talked about AutoGen earlier. I mean, we were using AutoGen when it was a day old to try and understand how did we combine a range of open source tools plus large language models and trying to address the deficiencies of large language models to do interesting work. I've talked about the digital responsibility piece, what a range of deals. I do a podcast. I mean, if anyone's interested, I talk to CEOs and founders of AI businesses on my podcast. I'll come back to that later on. Why is that relevant? The world's changing so fast, it's really kind of key to kind of understand those evolutions and working out where it's going. And we're just about to close our next funding round. So also kind of quite exciting and slightly terrifying at this particular point in time. So I want to go back to October 2023 and let's imagine this building. It seems quite a big building, quite a lot of people in it. And this, I'm going to describe it in the context of somebody sometime must have said, how much is that going to cost them? And this is a team that we built together in weeks. So it's short, I mean, coming back to kind of think common message, it's about days and weeks. So in weeks, we built a team that can pretty much do a cost estimate for anything. It's multi-agents, there's actually about 30, 40 agents maybe, but if you consider it as a range of different types of agent, in this case, I as a human might go, how much is that building going to cost then? I've probably got some sort of controlling agent, project manager type agent that's going, well, Rob's just asked this question. How do I turn that into a sensible scope of work for the rest of the team to then determine how to answer it? Maybe I've got a team of agents that looks at things like work breakdown structures, cost breakdown structures, how many floors, how many windows, how many toilets, etc. And then I've probably got teams of agents that then work out, how do I do that research? We just saw some demos of research agents going out to sources of information that might determine how much a window might cost and how many of those do I need, etc. So you build it up and goes through a sequence of agents until you get a report out at the end of it that say, here you go, here's an answer. Here's all the reference for each item that has been provided in that answer. And of course, the whole thing happens in minutes rather than days, weeks, months of that process otherwise. So it's not about prompts. The experts on the ground using this don't use prompts. They interact with it in natural language, and whether that's written or whether it's spoken doesn't matter. But it's business users, and that's the kind of thing that we do. We're not about cost estimating. That's just a use case. Actually, I think the easiest way, and I'll come back to that, the easiest way of describing what we do is for your business, for whatever you do, to solve a problem or to do a thing, if you were to assemble the best team in the world, people, we'll start with, people, what knowledge would they have? What capabilities would they bring? What data and tools would they have access to? And how would you do the thing to solve the thing? That's our starting point. It's just we build it with agents. And people as well, because people are quite cool. But it doesn't really matter in terms of how you calibrate that. And I suppose kind of where I'm going with this conversation is, what does the art of finding high-performing hybrid teams look like as we go forward? Because if we've got agent capabilities that can do lots of interesting things, how does that work with the people? How do they adopt it? How do they embed it? How do they redefine processes? But that's our starting point for what we do. And in the context of Agentic AI, because we didn't set out 18 months ago to say, hey, we do Agentic AI. It wasn't a term that we knew then. We talked about AI team members, which I think still works conceptually. It's about agents to work with the team, to accelerate, to augment the people in the team to be able to do those jobs. But it is autonomous decision making. It is goal-oriented. It's not goal-oriented, isn't set there, but it's something I'll come back to later. It's not necessarily process-driven, but it can be. And the agents can determine the way to solve the problem that I've set them, or whoever has set them, in a manner that they want to. So that's what we do. It's Agentic AI in highly assured, highly secure organizations. And so if we said, well, what is an agent? Well, actually, we've talked about that already. So I don't think there's anything in my definition of what one of my agents would look like too different from the things that we've been talking about before. Large language model, yes. We can use any large language model. It doesn't really matter. We can use a small language model for that matter. We don't fine-tune them. I'm not interested in that as a pattern in the context of the work we do, for many of the reasons that were talked about in the first presentation in terms of security, if I'm working in highly assured, highly secure environments. I give them personas. They know what they do. They know what they have that knowledge, that capability. So they're able. I always think of it like top trump cards, for those that know those. It's a bit like that. It's kind of what they're good at, what they're not so good at, to enable you to know who you've got in your team. We talked about skill set and knowledge, kind of the things that they need to know specifically. It comes back to, I don't fine tune them. I give them skill set. And yes, vector was mentioned earlier. We could talk about graph too. There are a range of ways that we can do that. And of course, it can be documents in all sorts of different forms, but I can also just talk to them. So we've got specific examples where we've got experts, deep experts, my age or older, about to retire, so much know-how in their head. Talk to it. Feed it that knowledge. We also make them teachable. So you can interact with these agent teams as they're doing their work. You can disagree, you can add to it. You can tell them when they should do something different for whatever reason. And yes, there's governance at the back end that says, Do you want to adopt that as you, the individual, or you as a department, or you across the enterprise business as a whole? And we give them lifelong memory. Memory's improved a lot since we started doing this, but it's important in our world that every part of it is fully auditable, fully replayable, fully interrogatable in the context of the thing, fully transparent, fully responsible, etc. And yes, we give them tools, because we've talked about tools quite a lot. And now the tools that we've talked about, it could be internet research, it could be write a Word document, write an Excel document, and yes, it can be API calls into various enterprise tools as well. We had a debate earlier, which was, how do organisations react to some of these things? And of course, if I said to an organisation, yes, we can interact with your SAP or Oracle system and agents can write into it. Maybe they're not so keen on that at this point in time than they are reading it, but yes, giving them the tools. And that's an agent. And I guess the thing that you saw on the last demo was multiple agents working together, and that's what we then do. It's bring together multiple agents with niche expert capabilities to be able to massively accelerate the work that's needed to be done. And I know it's been mentioned earlier in terms of DeepSeek, but I'll come back to, I don't care what the model is. I am agnostic of model. It's not what we're about. I don't need huge infrastructures. We can deploy it, or we can service it from our instances. We can work with organisations who've got their own, or we can deploy it on their own servers in their own on-premise data centre if they want. It's not doing the work of models or fine-tuning. It is responsible by design. And I think that comes back to my point earlier around digital responsibility. We are ensuring that these agents and agent teams especially can operate in places where that is critically important because of the regulations and the legislation and the policies that exist in those spaces. They cannot afford, irrespective of hallucination, we cannot afford for anything other than to be a deterministic outcome based on using some of the tools that are very probabilistic in their nature. Moving on. So I mentioned the podcast, and I mentioned kind of what does a high-performing hybrid team look like. And to be clear, I don't know that there's the answer to that. I've done a range of presentations when I've talked about this, and had people saying, oh, well, we've been looking at that and studying it since the 1990s, as in multi-agent teams from an academic point of view. Of course, the reality is you can now make them work. So Simon Torrance, I spoke to a few weeks ago, we talked about insurance on the last conversation. Simon's an insurance industry expert. And Simon talked about a particular example, I think in France, where an insurance business is effectively one person and a set of agents that have been created to run that insurance business. So that's an extreme example. It's if kind of people are concerned about jobs, then you're probably not going to like that particular example because it demonstrates what can be done in terms of workflows or work that needs to be done. Steve, some of us might remember Steve in the room. Steve's still the British high jump record holder, 2 meters 37, Olympian. But Steve runs a management and leadership business called Raise the Bar. And Steve came on as an early adopter. They've got production, live, operational use of a multi-agent team in their business. And so we were chatting with Steve and why would you want to do that? It was about making my team incredible. I loved the phrase. So it's different from the first one because that was very much how do I use these to accelerate, augment, make them incredible, not how do I replace them all. Patrick, I'm sure many people know Patrick. So Patrick and I had a chat more recently, and we were talking about his thoughts in terms of what are the lessons from DevOps and thinking about how do you kind of develop team dynamics, but in the context of multi-agent teams. So now, I'm not saying these in terms of go and listen to all the kind of conversations on the podcast, although you can. They're only about 20 to 25 minutes, so kind of short snippets. But it's more trying to explore this emergent question of, in big organisations, how do you get that dynamic right between increasive massive numbers, potentially logically, of agents doing work in combination with people? And it goes back to that point that I said earlier on. If we can create multi-agent teams that automate and accelerate pretty much anything within those businesses, when are the right places to use it? Maybe it is about speeding up a process, because you can massively we've seen workflows that take weeks or months now taking minutes. So that's a massive kind of difference. I know many organisations aren't able to recruit the people that they need to recruit to do the work that needs to be done. And this is a solution to that, because you can train that expertise from the people in your organisation to be able to effectively use know-how far better than it has ever been done before. And that's a kind of piece around sustainability in terms of the business sustainability, as much as I equally mean it from a impact on the environment, coming back to my point that it says I don't need massive infrastructures to do this. So there's all sorts of reasons and all sorts of use cases that you can explore. But fundamentally, I almost see agenda, and this goes back to 2025, what's going to happen in 2025 and 2026. I can stand up and talk to organisations and say, look, I've spent 30-something years in tech and data, and seen ways of working across that are almost embedded that I don't believe are true now. I think agentic AI and multi-agents can be used to fundamentally change the enterprise architectures and the data architectures of businesses. We can do things in a far more dynamic way. I'm not saying we can do that tomorrow. You can, capability-wise, but we as organisations are not ready to do that tomorrow. But if you think about how do you get that mix between your people in the organisation, your know-how and knowledge. Show me an organisation that has effectively done knowledge management properly, effectively, cascading it through the generations. It's just not there, but I can see that this enables that. Linking it into systems and data that you've got across the supply chain, not just in the organisation. That's what I think the potential of agentic AI is. It's the glue between all those disparate parts of the organisation. It enables us to do something fundamentally different. That's not easy. We're all exploring that. We've seen that today. We're all kind of exploring different aspects of it. But that's the excitement of the market at the moment. The question remains, how do you do that in a reliable, secure way? As I said earlier, my background, COO of a payment business, I had to do things that made sure that in the billions of transactions that were going through the systems, it worked every minute, every day, all the time. So I need that reliability, but that's kind of that's the potential of 2025. How do we kind of make that work in some of these types of organisations? And today, we've moved from defence and national security because what we've found is that's also then relevant to transport and oil and utilities and financial services, those highly assured, highly regulated spaces. So this was to try and give a bit of a flavour for some of the questions, but to give a flavour of where I see things going at this forefront of a new agentic world. Thank you.